Danganronpa sucks ass, and despite what the internet would have you believe, this is the only good one. Storytelling in games was an aspect that I used to not give a second thought to. Gameplay was always the most important thing to me, and with gaming being far more interactive than other forms of entertainment, that mindset makes sense on paper. I mean, that's not to say I didn't care at all about writing, or music, or atmosphere, or any of that other good stuff. Even at 7 years old, I could appreciate the ambience of Mario Galaxy, and I used to sit on the title screen listening to the otherworldly main theme. A baby's first peak, I know. However, it wasn't until about a little under a decade ago that I began to recognize how truly important those other qualities are to me when it comes to remembering a game fondly long after I'm finished with it. In my late teenage years, I began to really broaden my horizons beyond what I used to just play as a kid, and it was through those new experiences that I found myself truly valuing the medium outside of pure entertainment. Yeah, who would have guessed playing stuff outside of Nintendo would do wonders for your taste? That's some divine information I've got there. I can credit this to a number of games I hold in high regard, but I think what kickstarted this newfound appreciation of the medium was playing Danganronpa. And that might just be the most depressing statement I've made in my entire life. Danganronpa. I remember reading about the first game in a Game Informer magazine when I was like 12 or something, and several years later, a YouTuber I watched talked about the game in a video. And after that point, all of a sudden, the fucking floodgates blew open. I couldn't go the distance of an ant's penis without hearing someone online mention Danganronpa. Like, everyone I had been watching for years were all huge fans this entire time and never mentioned it until it was socially acceptable to do so. Which, it still isn't, but I digress. And really? People are raving over a game series that's essentially a collection of books and a crappy third pedo shooter? Dog, games are meant to be fun. If I wanted to read a book, I'd go to a library. I used to see people sing the praises of Ace Attorney all the time, but I never really saw the appeal of visual novels and just ignored them. Of course, with how prevalent the series was beginning to get online, it was only a matter of time before I begrudgingly, and for the sake of a friend, that I not willingly got into the games myself. And in early 2020, when nothing noteworthy was going on in the outside world, that's exactly what happened. Aside from the times where you have to go, I can explain. This series is genuinely really fun, and I couldn't think of a better lockdown game. Every person I've known, including myself, has had the same reaction when it comes to Danganronpa. It starts with nothing but shame, as by submitting yourself to Danganronpa, you are now associating yourself with Danganronpa fans, and Danganronpa fans are just as dedicated to Danganronpa as they are to minors. But Danganronpa 1 doesn't leave a bad first impression, especially for someone like me who was new to this formula. By the time the trial for Case 2 rolled around and I had more time to get attached to the cast, I was into it. Case 2 is still to this day in my top 3 trials in the entire series. The mystery is good, the culprit and victim are fleshed out enough in such a short period of time that I actually felt hurt hearing of their troubles and the murder it ended up feeling. After that trial, I knew I was in for something special. And I think anyone who doesn't have fucking dogshit opinions would be too. Unfortunately, I was kinda wrong, as personally I do think that's where the first game peaks, but the quality is still fairly consistent from that point onwards. And by the time I was on to Danganronpa 2, I was hooked. I could genuinely say I was into the series anytime Mikon wasn't on screen. 2 has a slightly better cast in my opinion that leans into a different, more chaotic tone that I found more appealing. At this point, I could unashamedly consider myself a fan of the series, even though 2 is the one I would be the most ashamed of being a fan of. Actually, no, there's worse. But then comes Danganronpa V3. Danganronpa. From what I gathered, V3 has the most perplexing reception online and intrigued me well before I played the games myself. I caught wind from a few people who I knew liked the series expressing a handful of grievances regarding this one. None of those criticisms, though, rang as loud as the ending being a lot like Hitler and ruining the entire franchise in one fell swoop. I've heard some outlandish video game critiques in my time on the internet, but that was the point I was the most curious about. And combined with V3 being the last game, I was of course extremely excited to play it. When I eventually got to it, I got through it in a little under a week, and that might just be the playthrough I was the most invested in, like, ever. It was made up of a lot of intrigue, a ton of fun, some not so fun, and a lot of mixed emotions. This was the most I've cared about a game up till and since then, and ever since the day I've beaten it, regardless of what I initially thought of it, the game has always stuck in my mind. At one point, with all of its ups and downs, I considered V3 to be simultaneously the best and the worst the series had to offer. I had no idea what to make of it, but it was that mixed quality that kept me coming back to reflect on it. V3 permanently imprinted itself into my mind. Like, I moved on from the other two a long time ago, but I haven't been able to escape from this one for over 4 years now. And in that time, I've realized and learned a lot of things about it that previously went over my head, and I've come to really appreciate it for shaping the way I now analyze games. It catches a lot of shit from the fandom, and even people who don't like the games will tell you that this game ruins this series they apparently don't even care about. But as someone who once thought this was the most mixed game he'd ever played, there's clearly nobody more qualified to set the record straight once and for all, like me. Let's get this very special and very long-winded discussion off my chest. Danganronpa V3's prologue has become one of my favorite openings in any game, mostly for reasons I can't discuss yet. You'd think 3 entries in, they'd run out of unique ways to start these killing games, but V3 still manages to find a hook. As soon as the first minute, you're immediately hit with the biggest and most controversial plot twist that nobody talks about. What the fuck? I'm playing as a woman? While it is immediately engaging, it also comes off as oddly self-referential, like the game is poking fun at itself. It's a strange feeling, but not any more than a few hours in, I stopped questioning what was going on and kind of forgot about it. We've got another new cast, Monokuma's back and better than ever now with his marketable and equally puntable children. Overall, it seems to be just another Danganronpa game. But as we'll soon see, there's more going on under the hood than one would initially realize. The way this series handles its atmosphere is not often commented on. Danganronpa 1 captured a bleak and isolated tone with its setting, almost as if you're trapped in a school with no sight of the world outside. It's hard to appreciate for anyone who's never been enrolled in a public school before. For me though, it's one of the strongest qualities of the first game. As the game continues, this feeling of being trapped only gets enhanced as the participants of the killing game grow more divided and untrustworthy of one another. With an excellent mood like that, it only makes sense for the sequel to throw it all away like I did with my tax forms. Strangely enough, though, I think this works in Danganronpa 2's favor. Instead of retreading old ground by having a similar atmosphere, how about we flip it on its head by introducing a wide-open outdoor environment that you're still stranded in? It's an all-new identity that lures you into a false sense of security before pulling off its poker face and showing you the stakes are just as high, if not more dire than they were before. So with both avenues already covered, what does that leave V3 with? V3's Academy for Gifted Juveniles sounds like a name for a mental asylum, and with a cast like this, it might as well be. As a location, I never hear it talked about as much as its two predecessors. A dilapidated school rich with vegetation akin to the setting of the first game, while being nowhere near as confining. What may seem to be the worst of both worlds to some, however, I personally think captures its own specific image. Throughout the game, you can spot the Monokubs renovating the place in their exosols, and unlike the previous killing game locations, there are rooms dedicated to each of the ultimate students. These not only make for new areas to consider when it comes time for the class trials, as they often influence the cases, but it makes the academy turn from just another school into a specially planned stage for the act. Yet the nostalgic music and overall rundown look of the place reinforces the feeling that we've done this before. It feels fatigued, but in an intentional way, if that makes any sense. V3 makes a much stronger impression with its aesthetics than the prior entries did. Perhaps it's not a fair comparison, as the other games were made for a less powerful handheld, while V3 was made with modern hardware and consoles in mind, but I'm not saying that to downplay the art style of the older games. With that said though, Danganronpa V3 might just be one of my favorite looking games ever. The art direction features a lot more shading and darker colors on the characters, but my praise for this game's look goes beyond that. The way it's presented is overall better than the previous entries also. By all means, they did a good job back there, however V3 has much more dynamic dialogue in the everyday life sections, including basic camera depth into the environment rather than just rotating back and forth between characters like my Club Penguin avatar. Displaying the protagonists outside of the trials adds a lot too. We'll get to this later, but I think this game takes better care of getting the player attached to Kaede and Shuichi than the other games did with their protagonists. Not just because I think they're simply more interesting characters, but also the addition of their sprites during these sections helps convey what they're feeling and makes them easier to sympathize with. Not that there's anything wrong with the previous approach and that you can't infer a character's emotions based off of dialogue alone. I mean, I'm all for that subtlety, but my point is that this game just looks pretty and more visually engaging. I'll tell you, as someone who edits videos that used to commonly include discussions about visual novels in them, I can confidently say there's nothing more boring than editing a segment of a video talking about a visual novel. That's not a criticism of the genre by any means, but I've always had a lot more fun making videos involving Danganronpa due to how dynamic the presentation is. And that extends past pure looks. Now trust me, I'm definitely not the type of person to play Danganronpa music in front of the hose. Thankfully though, we're on the internet where I'll only get half the scrutiny I'd get in person. This soundtrack makes me go all over the place. I don't know about any of you guys, but listening to the music of these games in the middle of a worldwide lockdown is a vibe that simply could never be replicated again, and low-key, I kinda miss it. You know, aside from the death and lack of toilet paper. Can we spread disease again? Imagine being 17, cramped up at your computer desk, doing nothing with your life aside from spending 6 hours a day playing a shitty visual novel you fuck with way more than you're pleased to admit, and you're hit with... Man. One of my favorite qualities of video game music is how it can take on different meanings depending on context. All of these games do excellent jobs when it comes to utilizing recurring music, and not to jump the gun, but some of V3's most powerful moments come from the use of its soundtrack and ruining classical music. Sometimes I feel like I've been given a bad lot in life, but at least I can die happy knowing that this was my pandemic game and not Persona 5. Any praise I have for this game from a presentation standpoint obviously extends to the trials. These have always been the highlights of the games in just about every regard, though not gonna lie, going from 1 to 2, I was a bit disappointed by just how similar they were aesthetically and music-wise. Not as bad as going from, say, Great Ace Attorney 1 to 2, where the games share most of their soundtracks, but the jump to V3 was, to be expected, much better. I fucking love how they play around with the text all of the time during the debates, like little visual gags and whatnot, but also the way everyone's podiums will frantically shift around accentuates the unbridled chaos the trials are known for. On the topic of those trials though, they're easily the most fun they've ever been. As much as people like to dog on these games, even the worst cases are still entertaining, aside from Ibuki's dumbass pebble theory being correct that one time. Like, dog, I've seen some shit really cross the line, but I didn't even finish drawing it before you crossed it anyway! Some like to knock Danganronpa for its signature minigames that don't really correlate to an actual discussion most of the time, but as silly as some of them might be, that's kind of the point. What do you mean the over-the-top anime killing game has a part where you're in the middle of a trial and you have to spell out seesaw effect? They're there to keep you on your toes and be entertaining rather than actually making sense. I mean, there are countless other visual novels out there that offer up more grounded detective work than this. I've always seen it as a way to make the series stick out and have personality outside of being fucking perverted. With that said, V3 still makes an attempt to bridge the dissonance between the story and gameplay during the trials. The panic debates are a sound inclusion that perfectly represents how it feels to talk about this game in a public Discord server. The battle showdowns are still here, but I don't know if I'm crazy or something, but they seem kinda underutilized in comparison to 2. It's kind of a shame that they were used less often in this one, because out of every wacky-ass Chuck E. Cheese minigame in the collection, they made the most sense contextually, even though they're pretty inaccurate realistically. Because, tell me, when was the last time a one-on-one debate actually proved to be productive? Thankfully though, that free space is taken up by the best minigame ever introduced in the series. Mind. Hope you packed your parka, because I'm about to deliver a take so cold that it will make New Super Mario Bros. Discussion look intellectually stimulating. Drum debates are the best minigames in the entire series, and I doubt anyone would argue with me on that point. Sure, the gameplay may be as basic as matching topics from both sides together, but 1, the music, And visually, I mean, just look at it. Somebody really felt the need to give these podiums the ability to float just so we can get high and scream at each other. I can rub one out all day for these, but what truly makes them great is just how much they offer to the story of each case. Like, no shit, yeah, duh, but they capitalize on the most tense moment of each case when in either of the other games, they really wouldn't be able to do anything aside from dropping another non-stop debate. Plus, it makes a lot more sense than playing a mediocre puzzle game that you'll begin to see in your nightmares if you try to 100% this game. Or, you know, driving in a straight line while picking up bitches and answering basic questions. What Danganronpa fan is going to be able to relate to either of those? Moments such as the argument of whether or not Gonta could be the culprit in case 4, I personally believe couldn't hold the same weight without the scrum debates. I also love the smaller details, like how Kibo is always on the correct side, Kaito and Kokichi are on opposing sides, and Kaito's side always outnumbers Kokichi's. You wanna know another cool detail that I've never seen anyone point out? The sprites for these aren't flipped, or some of them aren't anyway. Kurumi, for example, has a completely different sprite depending on which side she's on. Yeah, as you can tell, I've spent way too much of my free time rewatching these. I also should extend some credit to the lying mechanic as well. Now, I get why this is often overlooked, because the game makes it pretty obvious when you have to eat a hot chip, charge your phone, and lie in order to progress a case. And even when you do have the option to gaslight everyone in favor of finding a genuine contradiction like the average review of this game would do, it ultimately seems kind of pointless as a lot of the backroutes are difficult to find, and it's not like the trials have alternative routes, since they just lead back to the normal discussion anyway. However, the mechanic is supposed to serve a thematic purpose about how lies can sway people just as much as the truth does, and therefore are just as important. It's a sign of the once timid detective becoming more bold and realizing that only through the occasional lie that you can eventually veer discussion towards the truth. The cast is a strange sticking point when it comes to discussion. You ever hear V3 has the weakest characters? While I won't dismiss that claim, I will say that it'd be more appropriate to label the cast as inconsistent, and for a good reason. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that I agree! There's a difficult balancing act that comes with writing characters in a killing game. On one hand, each one needs enough time to serve their purpose, but on the other hand, for the sake of intensity, someone's gotta die. Bye talk. Danganronpa does a pretty solid job at handling this, with some exceptions like whatever the hell was going on in 2-3. But as expected, each game does play favorites such as Kyoko in the first game, Nagito and Chiaki in the second, so on and so forth. I've had this opinion since I first played the game, and I still stand by it. V3 plays favorites the hardest. It becomes blatantly obvious early on that Kaede, Shuichi, Kaito, Kokichi, and Maki are going to be the key characters in this game as they begin to take bigger and bigger roles in the trials and eat up the most screen time. That being said, my perspective on this matter has changed. I used to argue that focusing so hard on a core selection of participants did a lot of damage to anyone who clearly wasn't as important, but honestly, even though you'd think that would be the case, I think that mindset is unnecessarily reductive and ignores the purpose of the rest of the cast. Oh yeah, don't get me wrong, there are some bigger misses on display that would make me think the writers like to attempt 360 no-scopes while taking a piss. And the free times in this game, you know, I don't really bring these up much since they're mostly supplemental, but the ones in V3 kinda blow ass, even for the good characters. The only ones I particularly liked or remembered were Kaede's, Kokichi's, and oddly enough, Angie's, because she keeps insisting on being all freaky like you did what with a sickle? But damn, some of these are like real junk food material and dare I say only appeal to the kinds of people who see any dialogue from their favorites as a good thing. I mean, no disrespect, but I'm more interested in meaningful development that occurs alongside the main story over what I can only describe as Persona spin-off writing. But a character doesn't need to have all the screen time in the world to still leave their mark. As I'll highlight later, the trials do like to give attention to the culprits and victims of each case, and I think they do a decent enough job of fleshing them out. In most instances, anyway. Sorry, Miyu, but, you know, you were comic relief. There's no better example of this than Kaede Akamatsu.
I'm the protagonist of this crazy story.
Oh damn, thanks for letting me know. I wouldn't have figured that out otherwise. I don't believe I was the only one who, as an outsider looking in, thought Kaede stood out amongst her contemporaries. If you ignore Ultra Despair Girls, that is, which honestly sounds like a great idea. It's not just because she's not a dude, though. Her talent, being the ultimate pianist, is a real, honest God's skill that she expresses passion for. And her personality doesn't just boil down to, I like piano. Beyond that, she's much more extroverted in contrast to Makoto and Hajime, who kept to themselves for most of their games. This is the first game to display the protagonist's sprites, which helps highlight her character fully. Kaede is a unifier, a crack of light in a bleak situation, however that trait comes with its own drawbacks. Who wants to play a little game some may know as Death Road to Despair? Let's talk about this for a sec. Death Road might just be Monokuma's cruelest ploy yet. It's a basic 2D side-scroller with the same artistic integrity as a Kaizo Mario level, deliberately rigged with impossible to spot traps if you haven't already died to them a dozen times before, and unresponsive slippery controls designed to make you fall to your doom. Something tells me that Monokuma rides through the lost levels and equates deathless 100% runs of Pikmin 2 to a Sunday stroll. Yet the most devastating trap of them all isn't the bullshit bomb and trapdoor placements or the barely functional movement, it's the fact that if you're persistent enough, you can, in fact, beat it. No tricks, you reach the end and you get to escape the game prematurely. So ignoring how you'll essentially be skipping 90% of the plot, what's stopping you from doing this? Kaede is eager to get the crew together and make it through this jungle gym of Twitch streamer rage content because no matter how difficult it may seem, with enough hope, they will eventually succeed. Little is she aware that she just took the bait and brought the whole ship down with her. Her insistence to attempt the challenge again and again turns every other participant against her, and ironically, the idea that escape is possible but brutally infeasible causes more despair and division than anything. And I don't think anyone who's as optimistic as Kaede would have been as devastated by this realization. Funny story, I had a friend who played this game, and when he got to this part, he desperately tried to beat it. Not after he was done with the game for completion's sake, no. He genuinely was not wanting to progress past this part until he beat it. It got to the point where he made zero progress in days, and his Steam playtime clocked in at over 40 hours, yet he was still dead set on beating this stupid minigame. From what I remember, I think he gave up a little while after. A real shame though that he didn't make that decision until after he spent enough time in the game that he would have finished the main story. It's a hopeless endeavor and a deadly trap for the hopeful. The build-up to Kaede's first case is nothing short of intense, and is probably the best lead into a class trial. I swear it takes like a good 7 hours to get to the first body discovery, and when it finally happens, I pop the fuck off saying that my prediction about Rintaro going first was correct. Little did I know that the following class trial was going to be anything but ordinary. What I like about Case 1 is how it spends a majority of its runtime narrowing down suspects first. Not only is that just fun, but it also paints the ultimate red herring. It wouldn't have been completely unexpected for Shuichi to have ended up as the culprit. These games have loved dumping seemingly important characters first to set a precedent for things to come, after all. So imagine my surprise when Kaede starts hopelessly defending him, even going as far as to charge her phone, eat hot chip, and lie. I already made this joke. Even going as far as to lie during the trial for his defense. And she copes for a while, but I like how it dials up the tension of the trial tenfold and serves as a good introduction to Kokichi just being a little shit and egging on the Shuichi antagonization. The first scrum debate is awesome, and after that point, you just gotta wonder who the culprit could even be. Because we've narrowed down every possibility, and I had no clue who the game expected me to choose, so, fuck it, it's Shuichi. But it wasn't him, or anyone else I picked, and I was straight up dumbfounded. You know when you're trying to solve some sort of puzzle in a game, going through all the reasonable options, yet none of them work, so you start really twisting logic and making a pretzel out of things? I vividly remember saying to myself that, hey, it's not entirely out of the realm of possibilities that Kaede could have killed him, so just to make sure, I'll choose her. It's an impossible scenario that I wouldn't have considered had my brain not been overheating at the moment, so obviously nothing was going to come from this decision.
No doubt about it.
I don't think I've ever had this kind of reaction to a plot twist in a video game before. This got me so bad, I was not convinced that the game was actually going through with this until the very end of the trial. I mean, really? The protagonist being the culprit in the first case? Killing someone right under your nose? That's ridiculous, they'd never do something like that. They put Kaede front and center on any promotional material, she acknowledges that she's the protagonist, hell, there's even a tag for it on the Steam page. Is this false advertising? V3 could have taken the safe route and had Kaede be our main character the whole way through, and, I don't know, killed off Shuichi here instead, and maybe set off some character arc for her or something, but No, that's not what they did. They crafted the ultimate lie possible and made a bold decision. Everything changes after this point, and need I remind you that she was only the culprit because nobody else would take the first kill, even then only killing who she thought was the mastermind to save everyone. Kaede was not without her faults, but she kept everyone united through her positive attitude. But with that now gone in the blink of an eye, it opens the floodgates for tragedy for the rest of the game. For the longest time, I used to think passing the torch on to Shuichi was some sort of misstep, and that these two should have had their roles reversed. After all, Kaede is drastically different in comparison to the other protagonists, and it was refreshing to have the lead role be filled by someone with an upbeat personality in comparison to two pieces of soaking wet bread. Hajime's alright though. However, provided Kaede and Shuichi's personalities remain the same in this hypothetical rewrite that's nowhere near as clever as I used to think it was, I believe reversing the roles would detract from this game's themes. Kaede served as a beacon of light during bleak times, and through that kindness and support, she brought someone like Shuichi, a talented person who had no confidence in his abilities or his whole being, out of darkness. I can speak as someone who also has trouble realizing my own strengths, that sometimes you need another person to help you understand the potential you hold within. As sad as this may be though, we can help others in times of need as much as we want, but eventually we'll lose those people in our lives. Whether that happens decades from now, or in an instant during an unpreventable scenario, fairly or unfairly, that other person won't be with us forever. But instead of worrying when they'll be gone or wallowing in despair when they've been taken from you, there comes a time when you need to get back up on your feet and use what they gave you to push forward. And maybe with that newfound strength, you can change somebody else for the better, just as they did for you. And so, Clair de Lune is forever ruined, Debussy is rolling around in his grave, and Kaede is his legacy. If you couldn't tell by Shuichi taking off his hat, this is a showcase of character development. Yeah, Danganronpa is pretty subtle about this stuff. You know, when you see people talking about Danganronpa online, discussion mostly darts towards the trials. And that makes sense, as they are the most entertaining parts of the games. However, I don't think the daily life segments get enough credit. These are what build the characters towards those big trials after all, and well, I don't know about you, but I kinda like a good writing in my book game. Some may say I'm playing the wrong game for that stuff, but my counterpoint is Chapter 2. Because Kaede is busy hanging out, we've got to start from scratch with Shuichi. And low-key, I don't know if I miss Kaede or Shuichi's hat more. It's a hard adjustment to make, and I can't blame people for disregarding our new lead, because at first glance he does appear to be more of the same when it comes to this series' protagonists. Whereas those latter two took too long to develop in my opinion though. With Shuichi, we get a whole chapter dedicated to his growth as soon as we take control of him. He doesn't immediately recover from Kaede's death, because you know, that's not how losing a loved one works. You can put on a tough face about it, but the facade will collapse in on itself soon enough. Wounds don't heal overnight. Thankfully, there's someone else who can bring Shuichi's spirits back up. Kaito is a total bro, and while I'd like to touch on him more later, I love the dynamic these two have. It's different from Kaede because, well, for one, it's two guys instead of an obvious ship, unless if there's something Shuichi's not cluing us in on. And also, while Kaito is another outgoing guy who can bring a lot of people into his circle with ease, he's nowhere near as good of a leader as Kaede was. It quickly becomes apparent that Kaito isn't exactly not stupid, and that eventually causes conflict down the line when he has to butt heads with logic. Much like with Kaede, it's his encouragement that gets Shuichi to break free from his shell and flaunt his detective prowess. Case 2 is the perfect opportunity to showcase his new skills, as it sports a more deliberately convoluted murder scheme, a tangled mess of alibis to sort through, a Himiko to deal with, and probably the smartest culprit in the game. I mean, where's the competition? I don't really care about Kurumi as a character. I mean, design-wise she's cool, I guess, but in terms of personality, well, that kinda falls flatter than she does. However, as the first true culprit that Shuichi has to take down, she fits perfectly. Her plan was almost foolproof, and he can even acknowledge that, but with some encouragement from Kaito, who doesn't do anything else in the trial, he stands by his deductions. You can throw a word salad akin to a typical negative Final Fantasy XVI review at him, but he still tears through her lies and snake-like emotional manipulation with sheer confidence. It's an underrated, satisfying as hell trial, and the real kicker? You find out he got the Prime Minister executed. What a badass.
Yeah, that's right.
This case also ends up touching on the issue of your life's value, as both Ryoma and Kurumi dramatically contrast each other. Kurumi's life matters as she upkeeps an entire country, which, saying that now, kinda sounds out of character for a president or prime minister of any country. Meanwhile, Ryoma had nobody, and at the suggestion of someone else, gave up on his own life, convinced he was worthless. When really, it's not someone else's prerogative to tell someone else how much worth their life holds just because they're supposedly more important. But that goes to show that without the emotional support that he ended up receiving, Shuichi could have ended up the same way and lost himself as well. It's a good chapter with a great trial following it up that I don't think people sing the praise of enough. Shuichi's debut is awesome, and I think it deserves a lot more credit. Alright, so with that out of my system, let's get a dose of third case syndrome in here. This chapter is a whole nother can of the weirdest worms you can find. Remember the plot point about the student council that ends up going nowhere after Angie is murdered? Yeah, neither did I. The occult setting for the chapter is really damn cool. I mean, again, V3 knocks it out of the park when it comes to visuals, and this section of the Academy is no exception. Anyway, the main reason I wanted to devote time to this chapter is the class trial. At one point, this was my least favorite case in the entire series. Yeah. Let's get this out of the way. First off, my trial ranking is kinda cringe, and there's nothing we can do about it except hopefully redeem myself here.
Don't you even understand something as basic as that, you filthy cum dumpster?
Case 3 is not my least favorite anymore, and I definitely think the other third cases are worse, and honestly, I wouldn't even call it bad. More so, it's lacking in some areas, but even the aspects about it I do take issue with, I can excuse, as I feel some of them do end up contributing to the game's plot in the grand scheme of things. The locked room mystery during the first half is my favorite part. I'm a real sucker for these types of scenarios. And meanwhile, the latter half, or actually the more than latter half that shifts the conversation towards Tenko's murder is, frankly, much less interesting and easier to figure out. In the game that ultimately has the strongest trials in terms of complexity, this one is far too simple to be engaging to me, and disappointingly, it becomes the main focus of the case. Like, come on, you don't need an ultimate detective to tell you that the guy who organized the seance is the murderer behind it. However, after I spent some time, developed a few more brain cells, I think I get the idea the devs were going for. It's easy to write off Tenko's murder because the culprit behind it can't be the Blackened, and also because Tenko is just a dogshit character, so who cares? I honestly laughed when she died. Of course she was going to die, dude. You expect me to feel something when you not so subtly build up to the death of the character with basically no likable qualities? If you really want to get me to care, maybe kill off a third character and make it someone I do like. That said, you can't ignore somebody else's death even if it may seem like the logical thing to do. To only look at a situation like this from the surface level is a narrow-minded point of view, and sometimes you have to put trust in a belief not founded on any hard evidence. Through this new reasoning, we're able to uncover a link between the two murders that help us come to the truth. That's a potent message for a game like this to have that only gets reinforced as you proceed onward. But let's not pretend that having good themes makes this case completely without holes. Korekiyo is not a good culprit. And no, I'm not talking about the whole incest shit or the seesaw either, even though the seesaw is pretty badass. Unlike the previous games, which also did the double murders for the third cases, V3 doesn't immediately make it obvious whether or not Korekiyo's behind both, which ends up creating an interesting dilemma where the cast is now standing in front of a killer who they can't condemn at the moment and actually have to defend, coming full circle with our debacle about narrow-mindedness. But I noticed this when watching a friend a few months ago play this game for the first time. They really like to play up Korekiyo as a red herring and then act smart when he's all like, oh yes, he killed Tenko, but you see, there's no way he could have killed Angie as well. And they try so hard to sell you on the idea that there's no way they'd ever have the same culprit for both victims, even though that's what the other games did. I mean, I think they really thought it would blow my mind when it's revealed that he killed Angie also, when really, I was just like, really, bro? You're doing too much, bro. I also love how this means that if Shuichi lost the scrum debate, the trial would have ended quicker and everyone would have been confused. Sometimes I tell myself that things would have been better and more tragic if Himiko was Angie's murderer all along, but being real, if there's any game I don't like rewriting, it's definitely this one. There's a method behind this game's madness that the types of individuals who think they're the shit for opening a video game review with a quote from a philosopher who they're not even a fraction as smart as should ever attempt to to scribble over. Himiko's nothing special as a character, however, I've warmed up to her as a survivor, and she's a better pick than Kurekio. Oh yeah, I absolutely thought she was going to die, so seeing that she was one of the three survivors, what the fuck? That caught me off guard for sure. She seems like the most out-of-pocket one, like with Yasuhiro and Kazuichi. Actually, I'm going to go on a bit of a side tangent. Yasuhiro deserves to survive, and I'm tired of pretending he doesn't. Danganronpa 1 is a story about a bunch of lunatics with the worst chemistry possible getting trapped in a school and being politely forced to kill each other. Sure, Hiro doesn't get any major development like the rest of the cast, and I've seen some people call him annoying because of the friction he causes, but that's kind of the point. He's a paranoid, gullible goofball that drives conflict amidst a group of ticking time bombs. Danganronpa 1 has the cast with the most destructive synergy, and Hiro adds to that. Like, I'm sorry, but my dude is so overhated, and anyone who says he should have been benched genuinely gets no pussy. Anyway, sorry, I needed to crash out about that for a sec. This video is about a better game. Himiko doesn't really care about anything, like me when I play games anymore, until she's shown affection from others, and even though those others are Tenko and Angie, it's enough to help her find a reason to want to live. Sure, that doesn't make her the deepest character by any means, but her surviving makes sense, as she follows by the recurring themes as the rest of the survivors. Oh, last thing about this case, I completely forgot to touch on the Necronomicon. That's still a stupid motive. I can't believe I thought this might have actually been put to use whenever I first played the game. Like, yeah, let's bring somebody back to life in a killing game. God, maybe after a few dozen entries and they exhaust every other idea, they'd actually go with an idea as dumb as this one. Case 4 is a real keeper. And not because of the whole virtual world nonsense. I mean, that makes for an interesting mystery, sure, but it's like an alternative take on Case 4 in Danganronpa 2, except with a focus on programming logic in favor of geometry. And as someone who has wasted too much time on stupid video games, it's a lot easier to piece together how the virtual world works in comparison to the funhouse, making it much easier to piece everything together, to me at least. Where V3 Case 4 makes up for this shortcoming, however, it comes in the form of character drama. This aspect of the series was definitely at its strongest in the first game, because for most of that one, those guys wanted to scratch each other's eyes out and take a piss or something. It's one key trait of Danganronpa 1 that's sadly not captured as well in the latter two games, but here, that quality shines through once more. Let's talk Kokichi for a second. I'd give Danganronpa a lot of shit for reusing archetypes throughout the series, such as the smart female secondary character, the seemingly important character who gets offed early, and in this case, the rival and or antagonistic one who puts up friction against the main character. Real shame it's handled so well that I don't give a shit. Whereas Byakuya serves as representation for the letterboxed community, and Nagito is an unorthodox freak who's also really good at weeding out the most unwell people in this fandom, Kokichi is a bitch. Hofriki sticks out amongst his contemporaries as it's hard to grasp at what the motive behind his actions really is. Even Nagito spells it out that he's acting out for the sake of hope, even though the ways he achieves that goal is completely backwards. This gremlin, on the other hand, comes across as if he's constantly playing a game of who wants to violate every amendment. But if you hit your head with an anvil and squint a little, you can see what he's getting at. Kokichi seemingly plays the villain just for the sake of it. At least that's what it seems at first. It's not until now that his master plan begins to unfold. He ropes Gonta into his murder scheme, mainly for self-defense, and things don't exactly go according to plan. When Gonta loses his memory of Miyu's death, the whole conversation derails into infighting that's still more mature than the average presidential debate, which devolves into a faith versus logic battle. After all, it seems impossible for Gonta to be a murderer. He is a true gentleman, to be fair, but the evidence says otherwise. Gonta's won over everyone's favor at this point, and Kokichi hasn't. But he's correct, and Kaito's unwavering faith drives a wedge between him and his loyal sidekick. If the previous cases were showing how intertwining belief in others and logic can reveal the truth, Case 4 is when the scale tips too far in the latter's favor. Let's be real, Kaito's a cool dude and all, but he's also just really stupid. He barely ever contributes to trials, and you end up agreeing with Kokichi more than you agree with him. In fact, I don't think you ever end up agreeing with Kaito at all. He's a wonderful source of optimism, but you can't run on unfiltered optimism alone, especially in a setting where tangible evidence reigns supreme. Uncovering the truth sounds cool and badass, but that shit's cold like the average Burger King meal, and a lot of the time, it hurts. So if Kaito's on one end of Shuichi's shoulder, that puts Kokichi on the opposite. Being an advocate for the lie, Kokichi is an incredibly difficult character for me to articulate my thoughts on. Like I stated earlier, it's hard to grasp what Kokichi is even trying to pull for the longest time. What starts as a childish prankster who would be a perfect fit for message boards about a game that's not even out yet quickly begins to evolve into sinister opposition. And I'm just gonna up and say it, that Kokichi is one of the best characters in this whole series. This dude is a fucking riot. Like, half the things that come out of his mouth are rules to live by. He's a treat in every trial he's in, whether he's simply disrupting the momentum of a case for fun or actually trying to accomplish something. As the game goes on though, Adolf Twinkler here literally begins to steal the show. If Case 4 wasn't a big enough indicator that he's playing the villain now, Chapter 5 he takes the mask off. He reveals himself as the mastermind and destroys everyone's hope of ever leaving by prematurely revealing the big twist of the game. So yeah, congrats Dickwad, you ruined the game and I don't want to play it anymore, so fuck this, I'm out. But despite all that acting up, the numerous times he's coaxed hostility towards himself, and taking his role as the villain in stride, this is nothing more than another lie to add to the pile. Kokichi is simply a usurper, and it's whenever we peel back the layers a little bit more that things get more complicated. First off, why would you want to fake being the main antagonist when you're really not? It's in Case 5 that Kokichi's true motive is finally unearthed, albeit while still remaining somewhat vague. Kokichi has at multiple points hypothesized that there's somebody else watching the killing game, because otherwise, what would be the point of imposing so many rules on the contestants? Through this reasoning, he concludes that if he can get Monokuma to break his own rules, then the killing game would be ruined. To whoever's watching anyway. Now, that last part didn't really make much sense to me at first, but with the hindsight from the final case, it becomes clear that Kokichi was a few steps ahead. So in reality, he's not the villain that everyone thinks he is. Though I'd hesitate to call him noble. During his last conversation with Kaito, when asked why he wants to destroy the killing game when he seemed to enjoy it so much, Kokichi's response is the question, what fun is there to be had in a game you're forced to play? Which, while that may seem like a small piece of dialogue, completely recontextualizes his whole act as nothing more than a lie. Kokichi has been putting on a misleading identity the entire time. It explains his inconsistent nature. He enjoyed being a part of this as little as everyone else did. Yet, if he was going to steal the Mastermind's throne and hopefully put an end to the game, he couldn't show contempt. He had to go out of his way to turn everyone against him, tricking them all into believing that he's the villain, all while being unable to let them know the truth, as it could jeopardize everything. Wearing that evil persona with stride, as that was his only hope of saving everyone, and himself. And that's not to say that necessarily makes him a good person. I'm sure he made the most of the situation that he could at some points, but he still got Gonta killed. But if you view this from the perspective gained from Case 5, I think he was genuinely upset about what he did to Gonta. He just wasn't allowed to show it. In his mind though, the ends justify the means. He hurt like everyone else did, but had to hide it. The perception the people around him had was nothing more than a deliberately constructed lie. And I don't think everyone got it. Which I can't blame you. I mean, the game kinda pulls the rug out from under you regarding his character, but much like a lot of things in this game, when you give it time to stew, it all clicks. But I can't tell if Go Freaky over here is one of the most beloved characters or most hated, because the latter side is extremely vocal about their disdain for him, and it's always because he's mean. Well, damn, I think they got a point. I'm not gonna claim Kokichi is a massively overhated character. I'm not a Super Paper Mario fan after all. I just find it strange how by doing just a little digging, you'll find that no other character in the series gets as much individual vitriol as he does. And I think all of it is unfair. I'm going to put this the sweetest way I possibly can, but there are a lot of completely fucking head-ass takes about this game, and this one takes the cake. Yeah, of course he's unpleasant. He's trying to get under everyone's skin. Congratulations, that's the point. You got played. He's not a saint by any means, but that's not what he's trying to be perceived as. He's one of the most interesting, most unique characters I've ever seen in any video game, and that paired with how frankly funny his writing is, makes him my favorite character in the entire series. It's the combination of him and Kaito that also make Case 5 into my favorite trial. Not just because the sheer concept of the case with an unknowable victim is cool as hell, but these two cooperating with each other turns this into the ultimate test for Shuichi. The intent is simply to get Monokuma to accept an incorrect guilty verdict, a very quick in-and-out job at first glance. But that's the thing. Kokichi kills Kaito because he's an evil mastermind, and then he says, yeah, I did it, cut and dry case, everybody goes home. But Shuichi knows by now that it's never that simple because, well, he knows people now, and how they behave. Even when the solution seems simple, there's still a need to dig deeper. You can make a supposedly unsolvable murder and tell someone it's impossible to figure out the victim, much less the culprit, but there's a little thing Shuichi has learned by now. There's no such thing as the impossible when you have analytical prowess and confidence on your side. Now, I know this case has garnered a mixed reception for a variety of reasons. V3's surviving cast is one of those reasons. I sorta get this one, because Kibo and Samuki don't really have much relevance aside from situational happenstance up until the final trial, and Himiko, I mean, yeah, I was batting for her earlier, but she's still Himiko. Thankfully, Shuichi, Maki, Kaito, and not Kokichi are the real highlights of the trial. Like, you can criticize V3 for playing favorites, but damn dog, I found it harder to do so when the characters that they are focusing on are a joy to watch develop. And maybe you're actually smarter than all of us and you're all like, well, Kokichi or Maki being the culprit would be too obvious, so of course I definitely knew it was Kaito. Like, okay badass, I understand predicting the culprit, but there's more to a culprit beyond their identity. Kaito wouldn't kill someone unless if it was for a good reason. So now, how about you tell me how you went into this case knowing it was a deliberate plan to fuck up the killing game that he was totally in on despite hating the person who conceived it? Like, man, I love the part where evidence begins to pile up against Kaito being the one in the exisal, so he reveals himself to the class in order to nudge Shuichi into providing proof that, oh yeah, I actually am the one that's alive, knowing there is none at the moment, leading Shuichi and Maki having to quell that notion in the final scrum debate. I know Kokichi wrote a script that Kaito had to follow by, man, I wish I had his writing speed, but you can't tell me that he predicted a situation like this and told Kaito to pull that stunt should it occur. The man is stupid, but I think in this one scenario, he struck gold completely unprompted. Also, I love how during the scrum debate, their portraits are still opposing each other, saying that the other is dead. The crew continues to look into the case more and more, and there's nothing concrete about it. Nothing but a series of hunches that could very well be misplaced. There's a real possibility that Kaito is still alive and for whatever reason cooperated with Kokichi in this insane plan that could all get destroyed by Shuichi's logic. Recognizing that there's gotta be a good intention in what Kaito is doing, he considers that unraveling this whole scheme might actually be a misstep. To him, Kaito is a trustworthy person who is a great uniter due to his positive, carefree outlook on life. He's always been of the belief you don't need to have a good reason to see the good in someone else. It's through that reasoning that he brought both Shuichi and Maki out of their shells. Maki, need I remind you, was outed as an assassin, yet he still invited her to chill with the two of them because who wouldn't want to be friends with a killer? This has been to his own detriment at times, but it's in his nature, and you can't blame a person for misplacing their trust. It's up to us to recognize and bring out the good in whoever we meet. He's a very flawed, sometimes cowardly, oftentimes idiotic, pretty insecure person, but he changed the lives of those who seemed hopeless because he just felt like it. Shuichi knows what it's like to have someone put their life on the line to lie for you. So if there's anyone you can put faith in, even beyond logic, it's gotta be him.
I'll reveal the truth.
It's a beautiful send-off to my two favorite characters in the series, and ever since I first played it, I've loved Case 5. It's Shuichi's final trial to become the detective he needs to be, set up by the two most influential people in his life. Well, aside from Kaede, but she's dead. The difference is that even though everyone is hurt by Kaito's loss, Shuichi in particular displays a different reaction to Kaito's death. Kaito's gone now, but what he gave to his closest friends could never truly be taken away. So after the sorrow over his loss passes, they celebrate his life and use it to build hope. The last bit of hope in this desolate prison. Kaede set him on his path of self-confidence, and Kaito completed it, in the process nourishing a more united group of people than we've ever seen. A thematically perfect ending to this story. So the real question I had was, where the fuck do they go from here? It's kind of impossible to approach this game without catching discussion about the ending online. The most infamous aspect about any of these games that supposedly ruins the entire series, I was very curious about that point going into this game, and figuring out why this conclusion was so controversial low-key made me even more excited getting into it. I've seen my fair share of video game series end, but never have I been so invested in seeing one wrap up. I set aside my entire afternoon going into Chapter 6, sat in front of my computer for over 6 hours with no interruptions, and I just treated this shit like a national event in my gaming history. The final investigation is intense and climactic, even if the gameplay mechanics don't really matter. You guys even remember this game had a pushing mechanic? I had so many questions going into the trial, and nothing could have prepared me for any of the answers I was going to be given. It's funny, really. The first third of the case, I had no idea what anyone was talking about. I loved this part. Going back to find out the truth of the first case isn't just a unique opening hook for any of these final cases, it's also just badass as hell. Nailing down Tsumugi as the true culprit is a high that no other visual novel has made me feel before. And so I thought to myself at the time, what could possibly lead someone to think that this case sucks? Well, come with me as we descend into the total madness that this case devolves into. Lives are ruined, countless pairs of pants are drenched, and Great Ace Attorney looked at this 4-hour marathon and took it personally. Oh yeah? Well, I can do you one better. You know, there's no need for me to do any build up to this. If you're here, then you know, and I know, why V3's final trial is as infamous as it is. And it's all because of the infinitely astounding reveal that everything we've seen and learned about the outside world isn't true.
'Cause it's a game!
All of those events took place within a fictional world known as Danganronpa.
Oh no! We're going to go through all this plot buildup, 3 games and a couple of natural disasters, the long-winded setup behind the outside world, all of that, only to turn around and pull the rug out from underneath our feet with a none of this is real twist. One of, if not the most cliche twists in any form of media. None of it matters. Absolutely nothing. Yeah, as soon as Kyoko says that, everything clicks. The reason why this ending is so hated and the explanation behind the mixed reception V3 gets online, it all hinges off of the final 4 or so hours of the game. So, as someone who had been loving most of the game up until now, someone who had become so invested in this series in the past few months since I started playing it, and was so eager to see how it all concluded in what was supposed to be an epic finale, only for it to all get destroyed in one fell swoop, Danganronpa V3's ending is the perfect way to end the series. And I'm tired of pretending that it's not. Yeah, keep your ass cheeks together, because this isn't exactly hot news. Anyone who's seen my stuff would know that I've been rubbing one out for K6 for years now. They seriously could have ended the game after this trial, because I genuinely had no idea how they could follow up on this. And it continued anyway and gave us an even better ending. But the world isn't ready for that discussion yet. So it's been like 4 years or something now, my balls are dropped, and I think it's about time I tell you why I'm correct. The controversial nature of this trial has been blown so out of proportion that it's often poisoned to newcomers with these preconceived notions that the ending is bad and clouded their judgment, leading to that same misinformation they were told getting repeated and garnering the case an even wider negative reception for saying things that it doesn't actually say. I mean this in the least pretentious way possible, but this game in general, as well as specifically this last part, is the ultimate reading comprehension test that unfortunately most seem to end up failing. Let's clear the air a bit, because dog, it reeks in here. Let's start off with what the game actually states regarding this plot twist. First things first, the whole none of this is real part. We've all at one point or another have seen a meta twist. You know, the characters turn to the screen and they're all like, yep, I'm a video game character, alright. Look at me, I'm not real, but I'm talking to you. Isn't this game peak? It's easy to look at this and immediately think that they're going for the whole game acknowledges that it's a video game angle, but V3's take on the meta twist trope is much more different than any other piece of media I've seen tackle it. because it's not really a meta twist in the traditional sense. Instead, Samuki states that Danganronpa is a game show that people audition for and then get randomly picked to participate in the latest entry. Everyone in the world is apparently a huge fan of it, and being the 53rd installment, this season's gimmick is that there's an audience surrogate in the form of Kibo. Aw, so he did serve a purpose after all. Right off the bat, there's something wrong here. From the perspective of us, you, me, your dog, we don't live in a world where there are 53 Danganronpa games. There's only 3. Yeah, there's only 3. And Danganronpa has nowhere near as big of a fanbase as it's described in the game. Thank God. Can you imagine a world like that? We also don't see the entire game through Kibo's perspective, not until he takes over for part of the final case. The only lens we've played through are Kaede's and Shuichi's. In other words, when they say the audience in-game, they can't be referring to the actual real fanbase of the series. But if that's the case and they still call it ultimate real fiction, then what does that mean? What does any of this mean? Well, strap in, bitches, because this is about to get really autistic. The best way I found to describe this game's relationship with reality is through this graph that's split up into multiple layers. Starting on layer 0, this is our world that we live in, where you can touch grass and even yourself if you'd like. Next is layer 1. This is where fiction begins, the world that Danganronpa takes place in. Now don't get too scared because, like I said, these two layers are completely separate from one another, as Danganronpa isn't real. Sorry to burst your bubbles. Beyond this lies layer 2, and in this layer is where the world of Danganronpa V3 takes place. Is this confusing? I mean, yeah, but it's kind of par for the course when you start talking about visual novels. It's a common misconception that V3 takes place in the same universe as the other games, as they all take place in layer 1. But throughout the case, enough information is provided to let the player infer that V3 is indeed separate. We don't have 50 Danganronpa games in real life, so this world where Danganronpa is that huge is clearly not real. It's fiction. And I believe that it's a part of Layer 1. Some like to point towards specific parts of this trial and say that it demonizes the series' player base. It paints us as ravenous animals that just want to see people suffer for entertainment, and that we don't care about death as long as it's fictional. Sounds ridiculous on paper. I mean, is that really something game devs should be saying to their own fans? It's a good thing that's not what they're saying. The fan base the game is referring to is completely separate from the one that we're a part of. The version brought up in this trial is a greatly exaggerated, hyperbolic version of our own. It's one that exists solely to serve the plot and the message it's trying to tell. This game never refers to anyone in real life directly. In our world, there are 3 mainline games, and the fanbase is not even a fraction of what's portrayed to be here. It's not saying, why are you like this? It's saying, don't be like this. And that's a very important distinction to be made. When viewed this way, most, if not all, criticism towards the case begins to fall apart. Because the arguments against V3's ending are founded under the assumption that this is a fourth wall-breaking twist that undoes every event in the series when, I mean, no, not really. Because anything it does say is indirectly targeted towards us, as is everything this game has said up until now. As opposed to regular meta twists in other games that directly address the player with no room for debate. But for anyone who's opposed to my layer theory, fair enough. There are a million ways to interpret the ending and the things said in it. That's one of my favorite aspects about it, how everyone has their own idea about the true nature of the game. But if there's any idea that you shouldn't give any merit to, it's that the ending invalidates the rest of the series, because you'd only come to that conclusion through Samuki's word alone. And you'll soon begin to see that she's not the most reliable narrator. She's literally pulling the same stunt that Junko does, making people fall into despair by telling lies. The outside world is a total hellhole. You don't need to go out there, guys. Please trust me. Hey, can you guys not think too hard? I mean, you're just fictional characters in a fictional story. You don't matter. Did we all just collectively miss the cosplay cat criminal line right before the execution? You know, the one that heavily implies that this whole act was inspired by the work of someone else? notably a certain other killing game mastermind. My personal theory about what's going on in this game goes a little something like this. So we all know the story of Danganronpa 1 and 2. Junko gets a bit freaky and traps a bunch of people somewhere to kill themselves, as any high school girl would do. She gets killed with the power of words, anime, and friendship or whatever, and her wave of despair is brought to an end. Something probably happens in the anime, but I really don't care because I heard this shit is kind of like getting a cavity filled on your ball sack. There's a very interesting detail in the first game that you don't see much attention brought to, though. At one point, it's revealed that Junko has set up a bunch of cameras to broadcast the killing game to the outside world in order to spread despair beyond Hope's Peak. Like a weird, twisted, perverted reality TV show. And the worst part is that it's Danganronpa. Imagine if everyone in the world was practically forced to watch that. That'd be awful. Wait. Oh. You know, if the Mr. Beast Geneva Convention violation saga has taught us anything,
this right here is the room I will be suffering in for the next 2 days.
Humans can find entertainment in the suffering of others and fail to acknowledge that a real person on the other end is being hurt. I believe someone in the outside world watched this and thought, this would make for quality entertainment. Every game after 3 is not a genuine follow-up to Junko's killing games. Their purpose isn't to spread despair, it's entertainment. However, there's no real way to tell when this started, but they've either been just as depraved as the originals, if not more so. The producers started getting real people to participate, and who knows, maybe at one point these participants knew what they were getting themselves into. At one point or another though, the flashback lights were used to override the participants' memories with manufactured ones to practically turn them into made-up characters. And this is where ultimate real fiction, or in other words, Layer 2, began. Maybe these people willingly submitted themselves to a killing game just so they could be a part of Danganronpa. I mean, I've seen fandoms do stupider things, but for V3 at least, we know that these contestants were put here against their will. Tsumugi's tapes of the characters' auditions on them are blatantly doctored. Not only are they literally recorded in her talent room, she's shown that she can cosplay and mimic anyone's appearance. But, Lago, what about Cospox? Bro, there's less convincing evidence for Cospox than Cooties. It's nothing more than a cover so that she can't be suspected of any murder, when really, even following by this world's rules, the logistics of Cospox make no sense. It's a lie. Plain and simple. As if being a female Danganronpa fan wasn't a big enough red flag, you cannot take everything Tsumugi says at face value because it simply doesn't add up. There's literally a moment where she tries to gaslight everyone, including the player, using a false flashback showing that everyone here was actually excited to be a part of the show. And the only reason you'd be fooled by this is because the scene happened like 30 hours ago. You know, I didn't really remember the intro that well at all, and going back to it after beating the game with newfound hindsight began my endless downward spiral regarding this dog shit game. For one, nobody here has any idea what a Danganronpa is. Kaede, Shuichi, and Rantaro still have their names before the flashback light is even used on them, even though the auditions have censored them for some reason. I still don't get that. And most disturbingly, Kaede recalls that she was kidnapped before ending up here, which tells us all we need to know. In truth, Danganronpa is a game where innocent civilians are kidnapped, have their personalities and memories erased and overwritten with new ones, and are then forced to kill each other. All while being framed as a fun game show for the millions of fans watching so the producers don't get sued or something. Really, that's just as screwed up as what Junko was doing. For God's sake, look at Kibo pre-game. He's not a robot. They took a normal human being and drilled out his asshole or some shit to be the audience surrogate for this slop. Korekiyo arguably got it worse. Imagine having your whole personality replaced with a dommy-mommy dynamic with your sister! You ever watch Tsumugi's Love Suite event? Guess what? She's got that gross incest kink too, and now all I can think is that she projected that onto Korekiyo when making his character. What the fuck? I'm from Alabama, and I find that absolutely disgusting. Whenever you begin to peel back the layers behind V3's actual plot and look into the implications behind this supposed game show's foundation, it's easily the most disturbing entry in retrospect. Except nobody can see it, because it's all conveniently veiled behind the guise of entertainment. Now, what about everything about V3's plot that's been delivered through the flashback lights? Considering that we've seen the effects these have and that they can have contradictory information in them, I can say for certain that yes, the memories from the flashback lights are fake. The Gopher Project, the Ultimate Hunt, all of that is just a script pretty much. Nothing you see regarding those events are real. But honestly, who actually cares about the Gopher Project? Do most of you even remember what V3's in-universe plot is supposed to be? Because nobody ever talks about it, when in reality, that's the only thing the twist really ruins. And when I say ruin, I'm using quotation marks the size of my balls, because let's face it, that plot makes Rise of Skywalker look like a masterpiece. Only a series that's 53 seasons in would go for a story like this. Wait. It rehashes the hope versus despair battle yet again. Somehow Junko returned, Kaede had an evil twin the whole time, they teased bringing someone back to life with a book, this guy is rubbing one out for his sister, there are 5 Monokumas, and 5 more Monokumas, and it's literally Danganronpa in space! I feel like that last part went over a lot of people's heads. To say this ending jumped the shark, but none of this other stuff did, is kinda crazy. Sure, I was still invested in the plot, but after letting my thoughts stew on it a bit more, I finally got over how they threw it all away, because at the end of the day, it's just another Danganronpa story. Some might say there's a good plot in here somewhere, but after seeing countless other franchises go on well past their prime, I think I get that V3's in-universe lore is intentionally written to be as sloppy as possible. The only series that has ever had 53 entries or more and still been good is Mario. I've always found myself a lot less interested with the lore of the Killing Games in comparison to the character drama that goes on inside of them. That's a thing with me and stories in general. How am I supposed to care about the events of a place that I never go to? All of that getting discarded is fine, because these characters that we've been with throughout the whole game did change. They've been at each other's throats, they've watched their friends die, and they've still grown. And even if someone tries to convince you that none of what they experienced mattered, the people Shuichi and Maki and everyone else became is proof against that claim. Tsurugi's evidence is unverifiable at best, and there's intangible proof that she lies on multiple occasions. If we're under the impression that Tsurugi is the writer for the season and hasn't actually been brainwashed into taking the role of the mastermind by someone above her that we're not aware of, then well, her writing would make Nirvana Initiative look like Shakespeare. Tsurugi's game was so dead on arrival that she had to take matters into her own hands and then blame her murder on somebody else. This series sucks so much ass that things proceed as normal even when it breaks its own pre-established rules. But that's not even the worst part. Kaede dies living with the guilt that she killed somebody, not knowing that it wasn't her fault. She dies believing a total lie. Tsurugi ruins so many people's lives for the sake of entertainment, and only says it doesn't matter to avoid responsibility. Sure, the Gopher Project wasn't real, but the things these characters did and the feelings they developed, those are. If you come out of this case thinking it ruined everything, then I'm sorry, but you fell for her lie. Oh, and she still got caught by the very characters she created. You think when Kokichi did the whole mastermind reveal, she was all like, what the fuck? V3 seems to follow a very loose in-universe script, where the details of the outside world and character backstories are set in stone and meant to influence the character's actions, but Tsurugi doesn't actually have any direct control over anyone. And you see the problem with that. The story she's trying to tell gets derailed when Kokichi decides to be a cute little dictator and steal the mastermind spot, as well as spoil the big plot twist to ruin the story. The only solution to remedy this unexpected turn of events is to make a half-assed rewrite filled with plot holes that hopefully gets things back on the right track, when really it only causes her more problems down the line. She's a total failure as a villain, but guys, it's deliberate. Throughout the game, she's the most boring character to ever grace this franchise. One could say it's a front to make her role as the twist villain unpredictable, but even when she takes off the mask, she's still bland. Tsurugi is a loser who smells bad, and her whole personality consists entirely of the media she consumes. Which is why the only noteworthy things she says are references to games or anime that nobody gets. For crying out loud, she makes a Xenoblade X reference. A fucking Xenoblade Chronicles X reference! Nobody cares! Nobody fucking cares!
Here are some video games you need to play.
She's She's definitely the type of person who says animation is cinema and then tweets an image of the Mario movie. Passion for art has a limit, and getting to the point where you're so obsessed with something that it begins to overtake your life and become a defining trait of yours is when the line gets crossed. For your sake, get off Twitter, get off your computer, and please, just go outside. I used to think having her drag behind the rest of the cast for the whole game just so she could be the mastermind sucked ass and hurt the rest of the game's characters. And you know what? This does suck ass! But I have a different perspective on things now, and I absolutely get what the devs were going for with her character. A desperate fangirl who writes endlessly redundant slop for a series she won't let go of. The worst part is that people still eat it up. There's something to be said about the state of video games as an art form, and art in general, really. It feels like now more than ever, art has been treated as disposable, and the business side of things has been outweighing the creative side. Think of how many old franchises, especially in terms of movies, have had revivals or sequels decades after their prime because we can't think of anything original anymore. Not all of these follow-ups are bad per se, but more often than not, it's clear that they're being made because they're safe bets. They're popular. Some people, especially the suits behind the scenes, either don't seem to get that there comes a point where a series needs to end, or don't care. Everything that the people behind it have wanted to say has been said, character arcs are finished, and the story is concluded, and yet it keeps going anyway. Why this still happens, I can't possibly imagine. My point is that even though producers and consumers alike are more vocal than ever about games being art, this unwillingness to just let something end begins to dilute the original artistic intent. I've had to watch several series I care about conclude or never get follow-ups, and it hurts for something you care about to just stop being produced one day. You begin to miss it. But most of these new installments I wanted, while they had the potential to be good in their own right, are ultimately unnecessary. That's not to say all of them are, because some of these sequels can prove themselves to be valuable in their own right by telling a brand new story. A lot, though, have no need to exist because they would be following up on a perfectly satisfactory conclusion. I get it. It's hard to say goodbye to something you care about, even if it's just a piece of fiction. We use art as a form of expression and escapism to relieve ourselves from the cruelty of the outside world, and that's okay. That's fine. But you can't live there forever. Escapism can turn into a self-destructive habit that leaves a person unprepared to tackle hardships in the real world. Everything comes to an end at some point, but what matters is what you take away from it. What do you think was going through Claude Debussy's head when he composed Clair de Lune? I don't know the guy, I don't know what he was like, I can't speak for him, but I doubt he expected his work to not just become one of the most well-known musical pieces of all time, but to resonate with people over a century past its publication, even with those who would normally seem disassociated with classical music. Adopting newfound meanings as time has gone on, what could be boiled down to a collection of notes on a piano has made people feel things they otherwise wouldn't have felt. So through this one song alone, amongst his other work, his legacy has been preserved forever, and a part of him will always touch the hearts of people. I don't think they chose to put this song in the game just because it sounded pretty. I mean, that's part of the reason, let's be honest. But primarily, I think Clair de Lune is the perfect representation of this game's themes. Shuichi is someone who at one point could have never made it through these trials and tribulations by himself. But through his experiences with the people around him, he developed newfound courage to let his talent shine. And now he can change lives too. It doesn't matter that what he went through was a fictional story, because the impact of the people he met through it was very real. You can feel sadness for losing people or things you love, but when it's all over, use what you learned from them to be a good influence on those around you. And never let anyone tell you your experiences don't matter or that you're insignificant. Because anybody with a good heart can change the world. Damn, that's all this ending was trying to say, and it got hit with vitriol like it said something racist. Ironic that a game about the dichotomy between truth and lies and the effect they have on our view of the world garners endless hate because of parroted, false preconceived notions. Now, do I think all of the criticism directed towards this ending is unwarranted and that you're anti-art if you disagree with me? Yeah. No, of course not. In fact, I think liking something and still being able to heavily critique it, rather than permanently damaging your throat, shows true care, unlike what some people would have you believe. This trial is a little long in the tooth, which I can forgive to a certain extent, but not when they start doing that stupid thing where one character says something and then another responds by questioning what they just said. Really specific, I know, but it's all over this case. And it is a lot to demand someone to completely rethink everything they once thought about this 40-hour-long game to truly appreciate it. But dude, it really does make V3 one of the most interesting games ever to revisit and see all the foreshadowing that was set up throughout it. I love seeing someone get into this series, question why V3 is called V3, and I can only say, oh, or they ask why I pronounce it as Danganronpa when the title themes say it Danganronpa. I still see comments on my own and other people's videos that refer to the other games as V1 and V2, like, guys, V3's title was kind of deliberate. I don't think the message got through to everyone. Shit, dog, the fact that this is what made the public turn their heads and not the sheer existence of Himiko's Love Suite event speaks volumes about our society. Anyway, I think opening the door to this much discussion, theory crafting, and hopefully putting a book into the series was a way better choice than however else they could have ended the game. No matter how many things I would change to make the game as a whole better, those imperfections add a lot to the experience, and this whole game, and especially this ending, deserve a lot more credit. I'm not trying to say that if you didn't like the ending, then you're stupid, or that the case is devoid of flaws. But what I am getting at is that you're a dumbass bitch, your dick can fit through a Cheerio with ease, and I'm going to kick you in the balls or whatever is down there. Kibo, do something useful for once and end this dog shit series. It's surreal to be sitting here at this moment, finally putting this video together. I'm confident that you're aware of my adoration of V3 by this point. In all truthfulness though, I wasn't always like this. I haven't been entirely honest with how I initially felt about this game when I first played it back in the middle of 2020. I felt very mixed throughout my playthrough, and I considered it the worst game in the series for that very reason. But there was something different about V3 that kept me coming back to it more so than the other two games. Disregarding what I used to say, I've always held my experience with it very close to my heart, and little did I know, my taste was still developing. Over time, after discussing it with enough friends, I kept finding out about new details I wasn't aware of at first, and I really began to dissect the thought process behind this game's decisions. Which, yes, I've done that with other games before, and with the same series. But V3 was different. V3 was so much bolder about what it had to say. I just didn't respect that boldness at first. After reviewing it over and over again, reconsidering my stubborn feelings, I discovered a newfound appreciation for this game that I had subconsciously buried within myself. The epilogue is my favorite moment in anything. Ever. After a long, grueling battle of being told that your thoughts and actions don't matter and that you should just accept the role you were assigned in life, the final statement Danganronpa V3 makes is uplifting to a degree I can't even put into words. It doesn't matter who you are or what you can or can't do. What matters is what you experience in your life and how in turn you use that experience to have the same profound impact on others. Whether you derive that from another person or a fictional work, it's all the same. The things we create are influenced by the experiences we live through. As someone who didn't really know what to do with his life, hearing this message during an uncertain time for our world and the future, it changed my outlook on existence. I want to change this place for the better and get people to consider new views they wouldn't have otherwise paid any attention to, hopefully developing a deeper appreciation for all of the little things in life. And yeah, I get it. I don't have a loud voice. I'm not some worldwide sensational influencer or whatever. But I don't care about my range. If I can inspire one person and make their life better, then mine was worth living. At my lowest points, I feel like my life has no worth to it. But then I realize I'm the reason Chef Pee-Pee shows up when you search up Lisa Definitive Edition. Even the smallest things can change the world for the better. So please, even the littlest actions can make so much of a difference in another person's life. I know this because I've got friends and family that would be devastated if I wasn't here anymore. And, well, I've got you. And maybe you don't agree with everything I've said, or maybe you think I'm too abrasive, and sure, maybe you've got a point. But I just hope that I hope you develop a new perspective on this game, and why I think a lot of the hatred it receives on a daily basis is undeserved. I dog on the things I like all the time, but that's because I love this stuff. Past all of the low-hanging fruit you can pick off of Danganronpa, there's a lot of good to be taken away from the series, and I don't think it's right to disregard it because the fanbase can be cringe, or there's dumb fan service, and the writing isn't always on point, and Tenko exists. I don't fucking care though, because as corny as it may sound, Danganronpa changed the way I view art. I'm so much more open to weird artistic visions because of this game, and I know I wouldn't be the same without it. It's done so much for me, and as much as I miss this series and all of the good times I had playing through it, I'm okay that it's gone. Speaking from a solely gaming industry level now, I do find it disappointing that ever since Danganronpa ended, numerous attempts have been made by the original creators to recapture the same magic, to a homogenous degree. I don't want to devalue the works of Raincoat or Last Defense Academy, but something tells me they missed Danganronpa as well. Probably because it made more money, but it seems so blatantly derivative, and all I can hope is that this never leads to a Danganronpa 4. Because it doesn't matter how good a 4th entry would be, it'd never sit well with me, as its mere existence would spit in the face of V3's message. Like, do your spin-offs or whatever, I don't care, but please just leave this series to rest with its integrity still intact. Time goes on, and everything inevitably comes to an end, but impact never leaves. So, through that reasoning, can we really say anything truly dies? I know this is beginning to sound like some stupid Persona 3 shit, but that's just how I feel. I obviously try to back up my points with tangible reasoning, but this is just so personal to me, and I just need to let it be known how I feel. I love this game, and I only wish I realized that sooner. I can talk about how it has the coolest vibe ever, the soundtrack is one of my favorites in any game, the style is unmatched, the fun little mini-games and extra content, how Treasure Hunter Monolith is peak fiction. It's the gift that keeps on giving, and I can't convey all those feelings without dropping my professional act and just speaking straight from my heart. All these years ago, I learned that even if you change one little thing, even if you can affect one person for the better, your life can carry more value than you could ever imagine. Maybe you've been put down and told to accept your lot in life, but it doesn't matter how big or small of a role you serve in the world. You can still change it. Whether you need the support and love from someone else to realize that, or you're already bringing up others who need that message, what you do will always matter. And sometimes you won't know what you had until it's gone. But it's okay that things end. In the meantime, go out there and just live and to change somebody for the better. Because now I know that anybody can change the world, and there's no greater truth than that.